Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, I'm Amy and I make videos on absolutely everything coloured pencil related. Today I've got a little bit of a festive drawing for you, which is completely different to what you usually see from me. Today I'm going to walk you through my process of drawing a super smooth holly leaf and some berries. Yay! This is a great little exercise if you want to get right back to basics and layer, and also dabble a little bit in blending with either a solvent, the pencils themselves, or in my case, a blender pen. Let's get stuck right into this one. So this is a really simple piece, and the one I've drawn here is super duper small at just 3 by 4 inches. In case you're wondering, the paper I'm using is Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper, £140 in extra white. Wow, that's a mouthful to say. And I'm using mainly Polychromos pencils with 2 luminants and 1 Prismacolor. I always like to mix my pencils like this, and I find that all of these pencil brands blend seamlessly and work together, or at least they do the way in which I use them. This drawing started off with the leaf, and as always I started off with a really light base, opting for my usual warm grey one, surprise surprise, and adding this over the entire leaf. I used a really light pressure and made a broad shading motion, making sure to keep the pressure even on my pencil to avoid banding. The aim here is to have an even tone, which makes it easier to layer solid colours over the top. Unlike fur, botanical drawing doesn't have any direction, which often makes them a lot easier, as you can shade in any direction you wish and even add layers going in opposite direction, which you can't do with fur. So the more directions the better in this case, as it will build a super smooth look, which is just perfect for this kind of subject. I then used a cream Polychromos to add the super light areas around the edges of the leaf. If you study a holly leaf, you'll notice this tiny thin band of yellow, and that's what I'm adding here. I used the same pressure as the previous layer, and any slightly darker areas are made by adding a few more layers of this cream. Once those creamy light areas are added, then it's time to start adding some colour to the inner leaf. And this one I started by identifying the light areas and adding those in with my next colour in my arsenal, which was a Prismacolor, light grey green to be precise. And I really look at the reference and identify the really bright highlights, and I begin to shade this colour down in those areas. I always look at how the leaf twists and curves, as this is really telling as to where those lights and darks will lie, where you're going to have some shadows and where the light is actually hitting the leaf. With this layer, I'm still using that light pressure as well, and I shade back and forth, and I also start to build in some really small circular motions. Those circular motions will help build that smooth, waxy finish of the holly leaf. I then add in some blue tones, as according to my reference, these highlight areas are fairly cool toned and obviously reflecting a lot of sky. So a light blue pencil is next on my list, and again I use this in exactly the same way and then blend with a tiny bit of white pencil. The light tones are now blocked in, so now the dark tones can be added, and I start with the lightest green of my tones, mine being May Green Polychromos, and I use the same technique as previous layers. This is going to be the main technique used, so just kind of presume that I'm using my pencil in this way unless otherwise stated, otherwise it's just going to get very repetitive, so always use light layers unless otherwise stated. And I pretty much add this light green to the dark areas to begin with. I then go a step darker using a permanent green olive Polychromos, and I apply this to the darkest areas, just gradually getting darker on those really dark areas. And again, I'm using my reference photo really closely and using my knowledge of how those shadows and lights are working with the way that the leaf is curved and angled. I then go in with my darkest green and I add this to those dark areas once more, increasing the pressure slightly to get a really dark green tone in there, and I use this pencil to fade and taper out the dark areas into the slightly lighter areas. So there's not that immediate stop-start contrast. You want to keep it really nice and flowing and natural, so that's just lifting the pressure off the pencil and blending slightly into those lighter areas. If you leave it so that you have some really stop-start contrasty areas, that's going to make it look incredibly unrealistic, and that's something you want to avoid. I then blend over those layers with the light Prismacolor once more before going in with my pen blender and smoothing out all of those layers. The pen blender I'm using here is called Finesse, and it's one that I've been trying out for a few drawings now, and I'll be reviewing this particular blender in a future video, as well as creating a blending comparison video, so you guys will have that to look forward to in the coming weeks. Shameless plug alert right here. Make sure you hit that sub button so you're notified of those videos if it's something that interests you. One thing I will mention is that when I started this drawing, I had every intention of adding in the water droplets, which are present on the reference photo. I've also linked the reference photo below if you want to check that out. But I had a real difficult time adding them into this drawing, and I ended up deciding to draw the piece without them, which was the best decision ever. Once everything was blended and gorgeously smooth, this pen blender does a fab job, by the way. I then started to add in the prickles, spines, I don't really know what you call them, but anyway, I started adding those bits, adding in a little cream, and then towards the very tips using a mixture of pinks, oranges, and even a little bit of blue violet depending on the colour of each individual tip. They're all different colours, and I found this part of the drawing way too satisfying. I then start to add green to the entire leaf, so we're building in the mid-tones of the leaf now, and I use that mid-tone green, shading back and forth and creating small circular motions to fill the tooth of the paper as much as possible. I then use that dark green to continue building up the darker tones, and I use the lightest green to add a little bit of blending here and there and hype up those lighter values. I also use a little bit of blue violet to increase the blue tone seen within the reflection area. And at this point, these layers, it's all about balancing the contrast within the piece and building up the saturation of the colours. So just keep layering and layering until the saturation of the colours is where I want it to be. And once I'm happy with that saturation and built up enough layers, I then turn to that blender pen once more to smooth everything out and continue to build that super smooth look. You'll notice at this point that I've added dark details, which was where the droplets on the leaf were, but this is when I decided against that route and I started to actually blend them out within the next set of layers. A little interesting tip here for you. The dark shadows on the leaf just weren't getting to where I wanted them by solely using the green pencils, so I actually went in and used a little bit of red to neutralise and darken the colour. And I used red over dark sepia because I didn't want to muddy the green, and red works absolute wonders in neutralising greens and vice versa. Colours opposite one another on a colour wheel will have this effect with one another, so if you want to build really natural, clean looking shadows, use an opposite colour according to a colour wheel. As I build in more layers, I gradually increase the amount of pressure on the pencil to really get that smooth, waxy texture conveyed, and just gradually layer some more of those green tones, as well as blending out with white, cream and blue. The blue violet also really helps convey really natural looking shadows here. As I've used a liquid blender, it's so much easier for me to add white highlights and layers over the top of dark areas, so as a finishing touch for the leaf, I added some veins and fine details with a Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil, making sure it was really nice and sharp, and then I glazed a little cream over the top to tone. That leaf's complete, and now it's time for the berries. Yay! My favourite part, and actually ridiculously easy. With the berries, I started off with a light layer of light magenta. What's this, I hear you shout? No grey first? Well, I wanted the berries to be really vibrant, and sometimes adding grey under reds can turn them a little bit dull, so I went straight for an actual colour and I used it incredibly lightly. And I made sure this was the lightest colour within my chart as well, and I added this all over, even over the area where the highlight was going to go. Then I picked up my next tone, which was a pink carmine, and started filling in the whole berry around the highlighted area. So I preserved that highlight area with just that initial base layer of the light magenta. And I'm using that same technique of light layers and shading back and forth with even pressure. I also add in a strong outline around the first berry, and that's just to really cement its shape. I then build up more layers of the pink carmine, just layering and layering, concentrating more and more layers where the darkest part of the berry were. This was mainly around the edge where the berry was touching another one. Once the tones started fleshing out, I then added some pink carmine into the highlight area to blend it out, just using a really light pressure there and lifting the pressure off the pencil as I'm working into the lighter areas. And I went ahead and added some dark red to the really shadowy areas and started to make more circular motions with the pencil. Like I did with the leaf, I added that opposite colour, that green, to the shadow area of the berry, and this created like the best shadow tone ever. Seriously, I love creating shadows and using this technique, and by doing this you also tie your colour scheme throughout your whole piece, which makes for an even nicer piece. When everything and all the colours used are the same, it just creates a overall nicer effect. I then blended out with that pen blender and moved on to the next berry whilst waiting for the first one to dry, and I used exactly the same process to complete the next two berries. On this berry there was a tiny little orange section on the bottom with 4 little circles surrounding, and I added this with some sanguine, and I created those little dark circles by first adding down some blue violet and then going over with some dark sepia. I also used the green pencils here again to add some shadows into the surrounding red areas, and I also used the greens to create a little bit of texture and some shadow within that sanguine area. Once the 3 berries had their base coats, I went back to that first berry and I layered up some more pink carmine, and I also introduced a really rich, vibrant red. With these layers I used more of a circular motion and used a little harder pressure to really keep things nice and smooth. To the highlight I added some more of that light magenta, and I also used a little blue violet and some purple violet really lightly before blending out with a white pencil. I also added both of those colours along with some more green to the shadows to really make them rich and dark. The middle berry had a little bit of an orange tone to it, so once I built up another layer of those reds, I used the white pencil to lighten slightly in relevant areas before adding a really light glaze of some sanguine, and this built a really natural 3-dimensional looking berry, and I was really pleased with that one. I applied another coat to the third berry before calling this piece done. I really love the outcome of this simple piece, and it was such a good exercise for layering and blending, and just working on something different was totally refreshing and got me a little bit of that drawing mojo back. I'd love to hear what you think of this one, and I'd love to know if you want to see some more botanical kind of drawings, as they're extremely relaxing to work on. I'm actually loving doing this. If you want to follow along with this tutorial in real time with a full voiceover, then the full 3-hour version is actually now available to my Patreon and website subscribers. I've left both links below for you if you want to check those out, and I've also listed all of my favourite materials down below, as well as the ones I've used in this drawing if you fancy getting the same equipment as me. If you like this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up with that button below, and if you're new around here and you thought this video was extra super duper, then go ahead and click that subscribe button. Maybe even tick that bell icon too while you're at it. I upload new videos every single Friday, and I live stream most Sundays too, which is always a hoot, and it's great if you want to watch some live drawing and get involved with the growing community here. We would absolutely love to have you. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you next week. Bye!